Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a really fascinating journey mapped out in our source material, one that tracks the absolute evolution of generosity. We're going to look at how a specific Christian framework takes believers from mandatory, baseline rule following all the way to what they call exceeding generosity. Whether you're deeply immersed in theology or you're just curious about the psychology behind giving, this is a seriously compelling roadmap. The entire foundation of this philosophy kicks off with the concept of overwhelming victory in Christ. The text argues that God's instructions aren't some complex, heavy web of demands, but rather delegated tasks built entirely on trust. It reframes giving. It's not a burden, it is a declared triumph. And that sets a really positive, victorious tone for the entire philosophy of giving that we're about to unpack. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be moving through the foundation of giving, stepping into grace, the influence of God, integrity in giving, investing in God, and finally, overcoming a poverty mentality. All right, let's kick things off with section 1, the foundation of giving. According to the text, the absolute bare minimum entry-level step for a Christian is giving 10% of your income. Yep, the classic tithe. Now, for a lot of people, handing over a tenth of a paycheck feels like a massive leap, but this presentation treats it as just the starting line. That portion is primarily set aside for the Lord, and it's definitely not the ultimate finish line of generosity. But here is the catch, and it's a big one. You can't just begrudgingly write a check and call it a day. The source is super clear. If that basic 10% isn't given heartily and faithfully, you're basically stuck. You literally cannot step up to the next level of your faith. Even more dramatically, failing to cross this threshold with the right attitude supposedly brings on feelings of guilt and actual negative consequences in a person's life. It is a strict prerequisite for spiritual growth. Which brings us right into section 2, stepping into grace. The source draws a really stark contrast here. On one side, you have being under the law, which the text actually associates with being under a curse. In that mindset, your 10% is just a rigid, basic step you have to follow. But through salvation, you cross over to the other side, under grace. In this new paradigm, the text argues you step into grace giving. Because you've been saved from destruction, your giving shouldn't just be some bare minimum obligation, it should be absolutely exceeding in its generosity. This whole idea is anchored right in that famous verse from Acts 20:35. It is more blessed to give than to receive. The presentation uses this verse as the absolute bedrock for everything else. Under grace, giving isn't a chore you dread. It is actually the source of blessing itself. Let's move along to section 3, the influence of God. This first pillar defines grace giving as the direct influence of God working in a person's life. And the text uses a pretty catchy triad here, the 3 E's. It has an effect on the believer, it makes them effective, and it drives their effort. Basically, you aren't meant to just muscle your way through generosity all on your own. It's an outward result of an internal influence operating within you. That flows naturally into section 4, integrity in giving. Keeping with that rule of 3 pattern, the second pillar shifts the focus directly onto personal character, specifically your integrity to God. If the first pillar was all about the 3 E's, this one is about the T's. True grace giving demands that a believer be truthful, thankful, and transparent. It means generosity isn't just a cold financial transaction. It's deeply, intricately tied to the honesty, gratitude, and openness of the person offering it. Next up is section 5, investing in God. Here, the text totally reframes giving. It's not a loss. It's not a bill you have to pay. It is a direct investment to God. And we see another triad: source, secure, share. By giving, you actively acknowledge God as the source of the blessing. In doing so, the framework suggests you actually secure your own blessing, which then empowers you to share that blessing with others. It turns giving into this continuous, self-replenishing cycle of spiritual and material investment. And finally, we arrive at section 6, overcoming poverty mentality. The conclusion of the source document hits really hard with this specific command. To truly practice grace giving, the source insists you absolutely must overcome a poverty mentality. Within this context, a poverty mentality is that restrictive, fear-based thinking that keeps you trapped under the law. It's being afraid to give beyond the bare minimum because you're terrified of running out. Grace giving demands the total rejection of that fear. Using one last super memorable triad, the text gives believers the exact blueprint to overcome this mentality and offer their best sacrifice. First, You have to open your head, meaning you change your mindset and truly understand the theology of grace. Then open your heart, connecting with that thankfulness and integrity we discussed earlier. And lastly, open your hand, taking the actual physical action of giving generously. Now, the presentation doesn't just leave this as a one-way street. It finishes up with a massive promise. The source claims that this level of generosity, specifically channeled through the church, will result in God making believers richer in every way. But here's the kicker. The ultimate goal of getting richer isn't just to hoard a bigger bank account. It's to have the capacity to always give freely, keeping that endless cycle of grace going. So as we wrap up today's explainer, the whole structure of this presentation really challenges you to look inward. Ask yourself, based on this framework, where do you stand? Are you hovering at that mandatory baseline of the law, feeling stuck, or maybe even a little fearful? Or have you opened your head, your heart, and your hand to step into the exceeding, cycle-breaking generosity of grace? It is definitely a powerful paradigm to chew on.